And now I will officially welcome you all to another Regenerative Finance Lab in the Design School. One of the things that we have been doing in this space throughout the last maybe 8 months is exploring different models of regenerative finance, as well as developing new practices and structures and inviting different kinds of participation, as well as showcasing regenerative finance at the scale of bioregional funding ecosystems in different landscapes associated with the design school. So they're all of the recordings are the Regenerative Finance Lab going back about 8 months. And so we're going to continue that tradition. And what we've been exploring throughout the last few months since September of last year is different elements of the Earth Regeneration Fund, what it is, how it works, what its strategy is, what its vision is for 2025. We have various recorded sessions that outline all of those things. And actually, we usually find that we want to share these webinars publicly. So the one from today, I will also make the recording public so you could share it with people outside of the school. And that's because we want to use these recordings to invite people into the school to form partnerships with our different bioregions that are doing this kind of work, for people to donate into the funding pools that we're creating, and to basically have various ways that they can connect with us. Now, today, we're going to be talking about the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool. And I just want to briefly name, why do we call this a funding pool, first of all? A funding pool is really drawing inspiration, as you'll see when I get into the presentation today. We're drawing inspiration from rainwater harvesting. That there are ways that you can pool water, and then you can direct water to living systems. You can direct them into contour swales, into rainwater harvesting tanks to then be able to water your plants, and many other things that you can do. You can recharge an aquifer. So there are lots of ways that you can do rainwater harvesting. And a key element of that is to take diffuse resources and pool them. Just like you can have rainwater spread across a large area or spread across time, and you can pool it and then direct it to where it's most needed. So we're going to be talking about a funding pool. But specifically, we're talking about a funding pool for bioregional activation, which is to have financial resources that can flow from this pool into on-the-ground organizing efforts. And this is related to a larger, I would say, a discourse level reframing exercise that we're participating in with many other people around the world to try to shift the global warming, climate change discourse away from its myopic focus on carbon markets and technological solutions, and move it back to grassroots organizing, community economic development, and ecosystem restoration, which there are many people out in the world now that are doing that. And the primary way that that's being done is to move away from a myopic focus on carbon to a focus on restoring water cycles. And there are a lot of people doing this work. So if you know the work of Zach Weiss or Nick Stein or Rob DeLay or others out there that are doing this, there are a lot of people that are really strongly pushing for shifting our environmental discourse toward restoring water cycles. And that is inherently and profoundly local. And so you can't restore water cycles without local people doing local things. And so it's very strongly aligned with grassroots organizing, grassroots politics, grassroots empowerment. And so in this moment when the nation states, my current metaphor for what's happening to nation states is the billionaire class has basically started carnivorously eating and consuming the corpse of the global economy. The global economy is a giant death machine. And just like a large tree that falls and becomes a nursery for other things in the forest, there's this composting process. But unfortunately, the wealth hoarders and the technocratic surveillance state and its various sort of ugly incarnations in the world, which we could loosely say is the billionaire class, or back to the Occupy Wall Street days, we would say the top 1%, although really it's the top 0.00001% of the human population, is dismantling our nation state infrastructure and hoarding wealth. And a lot of people are getting caught up in partisan politics and other things that fail to see that this is what's happening. And so in this time, as nation states are coming to an end and the globalized economy is coming to an end, and the globalized biosphere has elements of it that are coming to an end, that we actually have to get really, really strong at local regenerative economics. and local regenerative politics. And so what we're going to be talking about today is a tiny way to start doing that, really tiny way to start doing that. And that is to mobilize really small amounts of funding to help people who are starting to do bioregional organizing and to create learning exchanges between them. So what I want to do is give about a 15 or 20-minute presentation, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion. But let me just jump right into the presentation because that will give us the context for the conversation. So let's jump over there right now. So today we will be talking about the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool. And as I was saying before, we want to pool financial resources and flow them to bioregional activation, thus the name. And this name is generic because there are various ways to do bioregional organizing and activation, and we want to support a diversity of ways of doing this. So, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that nearly all of the money in the world right now flows out into the world and back to the hands of the wealthy. And then almost none of it gets to where it's needed on the ground. And you can really see this with what happened to USAID recently, where about $30 billion of US funding was taken away from hundreds of thousands of civil society organizations. That the various ways that financial flow fails to get to the ground are just getting stronger. And if you've ever looked at like international aid money, or international development money, there are all of these intermediaries where professionals and international institutions take almost all the funding and almost nothing gets to the ground. So any of you who have worked in the realms of international development, you'll be very aware of this, that like the statistic in Colombia where I live is that of all of the international aid money to Colombia, about 1% of it gets to community organizations and community groups on the ground. 99% of it goes to intermediaries, which means the funding flows right back into the capitalist consumer market economy, which ends up being hoarded increasingly by the wealth and inequality structures of the world. And so what we need to do is start to undo this. And our way of undoing this is based on an insight that comes from permaculture, or if you wanted to be more specific, to dry land restoration. How do you turn a desert into a savanna or a forest again? If you have a landscape that looks like this with parched earth and no soil, how would you turn that back into a lush forest? And there's some really simple things you do. One, you bring some seeds. The seeds can blow in on the wind. The seeds have to arrive. Something has to be able to be planted. You gather nutrients around where those seeds are so that the seed can germinate and feed itself from those nutrients in order to grow. You need flows of water to come back to the place where the seed is and keep it moist. And the insight is that all of this happens in place. So if we were doing it around this little green plant in the circle, there's the seed, we better gather nutrients. We might add mulch or ground cover. We might come with a little pitcher and water it. But the key thing is that it actually happens in the same place over time. I know this is really simple to say, but it's actually very profound as an understanding of living systems. Now let's look at a real-world example of this. This is a rock dam that I created back in 2021 at our nature reserve, Agua. And at Agua, it's very degraded land, heavily eroded. And what I did was I stacked some rocks, which you can see right here. And these rocks are stacked on the downhill slide. And then when it would rain, the rainwater would flow down to and gather nutrients. This bigger plant you see in the middle there is actually a bean, a nitrogen fixing plant. And all of this material that's colored in green here, this is the sediments that have nutrients. And the rainwater actually brings them. So simply by building this rock dam, I created a funding pool. I created a pool for the pooling of nutrients and water to gather around a seed, in this case, a bean, that was gonna bring nitrogen into the ground and start to build soil. And so when you look at this, you can see that the activation of a regenerative process involves creating a structure, understanding flow, knowing where to create asymmetries to have a directional accumulation, and then to encourage it to continue to strengthen itself through natural regenerative processes. So we want to do that in this way. We want to work with a bioregional organizing team who can structure an environment like this. We want to flow resources. We want that team to be able to flow resources into their local community to build capacities for more organizing to occur so that they can begin a regenerative process, gather more capacities, and then have more organizing that they can do later. And as we're doing this, of course, we have the learning journey that starts next week, how to organize your bioregion. And one of the things we're encouraging participants to do is to host design immersions, which is in-person gatherings where they explore how to design for the regeneration of their bioregion with immersive direct experience of their local culture and their local ecology. And what's interesting about the learning journey and these design immersions is that this provides learning supports. What we want to do with this Bioregional Activation Funding Pool is to provide seed funding to this process, to be able to activate bioregional regeneration in new landscapes where people are not currently doing it, or if they are doing it, to help them get to the next level. So the idea is that we want to provide financial flows into bioregional organizing during the time of the learning journey. Said another way, we want to create a bioregional activation funding pool, like what you can see in this picture. And we have two ways to flow resources, meaning to flow money into this pool right now. One is that every time a new member joins the school, that's another $5 per month in membership dues that flow into this funding pool. And the other is that people can donate into the fund, and then that can flow financial resources into this pool. And then as we do this, we then have funding that we can flow out, we can direct to on-the-ground organizing teams. So people associated with the design school that want to host a design immersion, that want to gather people and begin organizing in their bioregion, that they can request financial support from this funding pool to help them to do it. And it works like this. In the design school, our main purpose is to support learning exchanges between bioregions so that we can move toward regenerating the earth as a whole. And these learning exchanges between bioregions mean that in each place that people are doing this work, they're learning things, and then they can share with each other what they're learning. But we recognize that the best way to learn is through doing it, to actually work on regenerating your bioregion, to apply directly what you're learning in the design school to your own landscape, or to bring what you're learning from your landscape to help someone in another landscape through the learning exchanges of the design school. So we want to flow resources that help us practice. There are people that would like to practice doing this, but need financial support to be able to do so. And we want this funding pool to activate that bioregional regeneration process by flowing resources to the people on the ground to help them to practice in this way. So if we go back to this image again, say, how does the funding pool work within the design school or within this framework of the learning journey? And it's like this. So the structuring of the dam, the creating of the containers, the convening of the context is done by a local bioregional organizing team. This is people who live in the bioregion, who are starting to work on organizing it or taking it to its next level. They're the ones creating these containers and these spaces in which regeneration can occur. And that the design immersion, the local gathering, is like this gathering together of nutrients and resources, bringing together people and ideas and the multi-capital flows, the knowledge, the physical labor, the infrastructure, the money that local people might have to put into local organizing processes. But then the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool provides flow funding, which is it creates a little trickle of money to support this immersion to occur, so that you can germinate the seeds of the process. Because the organizing team may have a threshold, meaning they may not be able to do this work without renting a space or providing meals for people or paying for transport for people to visit or providing an Airbnb for people to stay in or whatever they may need that are financial resources that could support local gatherings, that's what this flow funding is going to enable and support. And so this gets us back to the bigger picture. This is something we've talked about in previous webinars, that the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool is part of the Earth Regeneration Fund. And the Earth Regeneration Fund basically has three parts. It's a web of relationships within bioregions and between bioregions. Like what is happening here in Barichara, Colombia, what is happening in Cascadia, what's happening in the greater Takaranto, what's happening in the River Thames, and so forth. And then the powerful stories of what people are doing in those landscapes and the value flows among them. So the Earth Regeneration Fund is mobilizing resources into a web of relationships to enable actions to take place, value flowing among the relationships so that actions can take place and then stories can be told about those actions, which can attract more people to the local organizing, as well as attracting people to donate to the Earth Regeneration Fund. And this is done in different bioregions associated with the fund. We started the fund connected with 5 bioregions: the Highlands, Great Plains, Ogallala Aquifer, the Cascadia bioregion, the Northern Andes in Colombia, the forests of the Northeast, and the greater Takaranto and the Great Lakes. But we're now opening this up to allow seed funding to flow into other bioregions, which is what this funding pool is going to enable us to do. And then the way this works is the Earth Regeneration Fund is a tapestry of stories about these different activities that are happening with different bioregional funding pools. And this is the first one. We have this bioregional funding pool for bioregional activations. And so we can flow funding into Flow Fund starter kits, something we're collaborating with Kinship Earth to create. And they have their own donors who support Kinship Earth to create Flow Fund starter kits. What we're talking about today is bringing funding pools to support design school immersions. Later this year, in partnership with R3.0, we're going to talk about flowing funding into bioregional confluences, something we'll learn about throughout the year as it becomes more clear what those are and how they relate to the work of R3.0 as well as to the design school. And then also through Global Earth Repair to helping to convene Earth Repair action plans, which is to provide financial support around measuring bioregional carrying capacities, creating regenerative strategies for landscapes. Like in Cascadia, they're organizing landscape hubs and landscape guilds, and each of them will have their own regeneration strategies. So the Earth Regeneration Fund can help to flow financial support to those kinds of activities. And all of this is held within a scaffolding for translocal organizing. What I mean by that, translocal, is that through the learning journey, we already have more than 15 bioregions that are organizing that have resource hubs within the design school. And we're going to help people set up even more. Translocal means multiple locations in parallel. And that as different groups are hosting their own local design immersions or creating their local regenerative action plans or moving toward bioregional confluences, whatever it is that they're doing that's about this on-the-ground organizing, the learning journey and the design school provide scaffolding for all of this to occur, and the funding pool flows money to help these activities to happen. So it's all in an interconnected web, because as all of these activities occur, we create new stories which attract more support to the Earth Regeneration Fund, so the whole thing can continue. So if we look at this throughout a typical year, the way that our funding supports for the funding pool works so far is that we've had membership dues. Penny and I are supported by a Novo Foundation grant. And so we have funding that's come in and funding that's continually coming in from membership dues. And we use some of that money to cover the fixed costs of the design school. This is things like paying for web hosting, paying for the Mighty Networks account, paying for Zoom accounts. We're starting to create a pool of funding to support administrative support for Penny. So we basically have some fixed costs of the design school. But then over time, we have monthly income from membership dues. And we have a growing number of members. We're currently close to 700 members. And remember, every time we have a new member, it's $5 per month that's coming into the school, which means every 100 new members means $500 more that is flowing into this funding pool every single month. And so we're able to accumulate financial resources as we've been doing throughout the last 2 years. And then we're able to direct those in financial flows into this funding pool like we're talking about today. So this is basically our rainwater harvesting system in the design school. Membership dues are creating a monthly financial flow. Money is coming from you as members, coming into a funding pool. And as we grow the membership, the amount of flow increases. And as that flow increases, we have more resources that we can flow forward to bioregional organizing teams on the ground through the design school and through partner communities like R3.0. So I just wanted you to see that the money you pay for the school is not paying Penny and me to teach classes. Penny and I are funded by a Novo Foundation grant. The membership dues become a common pooled asset for our members to support the activities of our members and the learning exchanges between our bioregions. So we already did this. In the last week of February, we had a Barichara design immersion, and we flowed funding to support this. So we just flowed money into this immersion. We supported 40 members of the design school to come to Barichara. This is something that we advertised back in November, between November and the end of January, actually even into early February. People signed up and came to attend, and Penny and I created a form that people could fill out to request financial support to come to the immersion. And then we were able to support a local team, 2 design school members, Tanya Falconer and Ceci Restrepo. We were able to pay them to coordinate a lot of the activities. Those of you who were at the immersion, you know that Tanya and Ceci did amazing work organizing this immersion, and we were able to pay them from design school funds. Then we paid for travel costs and Airbnbs and hostels for the people who came from the design school who requested travel support. And we also paid for locally sourced meals, which we paid local farmers to buy their produce. We paid local cooks to cook for us. We paid for local spaces to host us for our meals. And so we were able to flow funding from the design school to these locally sourced meals, these cooks, and these local farmers. We also paid for local transport and logistics to get people around once they were here. We had these party buses called Chivas. We had like 5 buses, and we drove everyone around the territory. We were able to pay local people to transport us through the territory with this funding. And then also we were able to support local guides and services that we needed for people to have a really powerful experience while they were here. So you can see that this is a model for how other immersions associated with the design school could request funding for similar kinds of things. And other design school members are already organizing their own immersions. I'll show you 2. These are already on the calendar. You can sign up for them in the school events section or in the Bioregional Learning Center's events section of the school. One of them is the group Terra. I think Karsten's here on the call with us, together with Maria Elena, are hosting an immersion in the last week of May in Tarn-et-Garonne. And they've already reached out to us to ask if they could request some financial support. We're going to meet with them next week to explore how we can support them with this fund. And then Richard Coates and his team on the River Thames in the UK are hosting an event in early May, and they have also reached out to request financial support. So the important thing here is that we already have membership dues accumulated over 2 years, and that we are going to be able to apply some of those financial resources to support immersions, including these 2. And so we're going to be talking with the Terra team and the Bioregional Thames team about how we can support them with this fund. And then as other people decide to host their own immersions and put them on the calendar, they'll be able to request financial support as well. So organize your own immersion during the learning journey, and you'll be able to request financial support if you need it. Obviously, we have a limited amount of funds, and we can't, serve everyone's needs, but we're really excited to be able to start doing this. And as we grow the capacities of this funding pool, we'll have more capacity to support you as members to be able to do this kind of work. And you as members can support each other by donating into the funding pool. And so there are 2 ways you can contribute to this funding pool. It's really simple. 1, invite other friends to join the design school to just tick mark another $5 per month coming in for membership dues. So you don't need to even donate money to grow the pool. Just invite people to join the school. And by doing that, you're increasing the flow rate that's filling this pool. And then, of course, you could donate. Here's a QR code if you're feeling really motivated. You could go there now and donate to the Earth Regeneration Fund, and it will support this funding pool and these activities. And you can see that this is something you could do at any time. You could come back next week and invite friends or donate to the fund. You could come back 3 months later and do the same thing. And so the idea is we want our members to see the value of this funding pool, how it's supporting our work here in the design school and in the larger movement, the larger regenerative movement and the larger bioregional movement. And then we want to encourage people to participate in the ways that we're talking about today. And so that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you for us to be able to talk about. So you see that there's a very powerful way of bringing grassroots organizing together with collaborative funding, together with learning ecosystems, together with diverse locations of action. And we're doing all of this as a coherent holistic system. And so what I'd love to do is open this up for questions and discussion about, are there parts of this you don't understand? Are there things you'd like to contribute to make it stronger? Where do you see this going throughout the next 6 months? Who would you invite to help us to grow this and make this as impactful as possible? I see this as a potentially transformative opportunity. And so I see we've got a couple hands up, so we'll start having a discussion. And over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Joe, everybody. So there's a lot of emphasis put on collecting stories, telling your story of place, and our team right now is starting to launch out into what we're calling a regional tour. Basically, we want to go visit the folks who are doing stuff in our bioregion and to get their stories, and we start weaving that together. My question is, how is the whole storytelling approach um, feed into the funding piece? Like, are we supposed to be writing books or making movies, or I mean, I get that having a good story is central to getting some money, but how do we manifest it?
That's such a good question. Thank you, Claire. So I just dropped into the chat for anyone who hasn't seen it, a webinar that I gave about a month ago called A Narrative Strategy for the Earth Regeneration Fund that shows how that strategy for narratives works a little bit more. So it's more focused on that. But specifically, one of the things that we're going to introduce into this fund is a reciprocity agreement, which is if you receive funding, you agree to tell your story in a way that supports the fund. And so we'll have some clarity about that. And then, of course, in practice, we'll get better at it because I'm sure we'll stumble a little bit. But just as an example, we did not ask people who we supported to come to our immersion in Barichara. We didn't ask them to tell a story about the immersion in Barichara. And we realized we should have asked them. We should have said, could you write a blog post or just tweet about it or put something on Instagram? And some of the participants are doing a great job of that because they already are active storytellers. Like Salvador, who came from Valencia, has been posting daily about, Salva, you're doing awesome work. I mean, he's posting daily about all the stuff they're doing in Valencia, but also about what happened in Barichara. And that is a perfect example of what we would want, is to tell the story of what happened to inspire people to participate, and then to connect them into the ecosystem, to connect them to your own local work, to connect them to the design school, to connect them to the immersions, to connect them to the fund. Just there will be various ways you can do it. And so, like, for example, Claire, with what you're doing in Cascadia, it could connect with the Cascadia cohort. And you could coordinate with Andra about how could this lead to a funding pool just for Cascadia, but to name that it was connected with the funding pool of the design school or the Earth Regeneration Fund, to say you could fund there because that supported us. If we were bringing funding to support you, you would want funding to go to support others. And so I think that we're going to have work groups that we'll create to help people with storytelling. That's one of the things we're talking about. But also just to point the exemplars, like I said, if you just look at what Salva did, of course, what he did is in Spanish, so I know it was awesome. But if you were to look at it, what he did on Instagram, you're like, that was really good.
That's okay.
Do that. And so we'll start to have examples that we can share with each other as part of that learning exchange. So yeah.
So it's mostly social media, huh?
Yeah, well, social media, emails, basically however you communicate. You could put up a flyer in your local, organic store. You could do it in different ways. So it's less about there being a specific way of doing it and more about increasing the number of storytellers into more diverse places. And the strategy is really below the radar of the algorithms of social media below the radar of corporate media, have stories sprinkling out into the world. I call it the dandelion strategy. Dandelions are just seeds that blow in the wind, and wherever they land is where they land. But if there are a lot of seeds, you're going to end up with a lot of dandelions. And so if you think of it that way, then you get the sense it's not about every story being high impact. It's about there being lots of different stories that are coherent with each other. Yeah, and to be continued on that for sure. Penny, do you have something you wanted to add real quick?
Just to add that also that Bioregional Earth is going to be a place where we can tell our stories. We're starting to roll that out with some people once a month with the newsletter of Bioregional Earth, putting their story on the Bioregional Earth platform and then sharing it through the newsletter. So that's another place that we're going to be opening up to more people soon for an opportunity to tell a story through a blog article that gets shared through the newsletter by Regional Earth.
Thank you, Penny. And I just dropped a link into the chat, published this morning, the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool on Bioregional Earth as a nice example of what we'll be doing there. Thank you, Penny. And Julie, over to you.
I've gone from global organizing to a bioregion in Cascadia, and I'm finding that I actually don't know what to say to the organizations that I'm running across that are local. I'm not local. It's like I'm really have a lot of, concern, kind of pressure inside of myself about what I'm inviting. What do I say? Maybe it's the storytelling that will help, but like there's the Salmon Center in Belfair, which is like the biggest city near me. It's tiny. But it like, what do I, or Sahale, is 6 miles away from me. It's an eco village. And I don't know what to say. I don't know how to invite people into organizing it. So it's like, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to ask you now. How do I do that? What am I inviting them to do?
That's such a good question. And one thing is you could invite someone to just join our learning journey where they'll get to learn to answer that question themselves. Like, how do you organize in a bioregion? I don't know. Let's go learn together. So that's one thing just right off the bat. But the other thing is something after our immersion here in Barichara, we had 2 people that were here from Boulder, Colorado, and that are connected with the Eco Village Alliance. And they were asking, how do we start to explore the stories around Boulder? Is it about the Front Range? Is it about the Rockies? What is it? And I said, well, a good thing you can do is just ask your friends from that place, why do they love living there? And as they tell you why they love, it's like, why did you move to the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains? And they probably have good answers. They love hiking. They like going to the Rocky Mountain National Park. They will have answers that are probably going to be bioregional answers. They'll have answers about the culture and the ecology that's unique to that place. Like when I lived in Seattle, and so like, why do you like living in Seattle? I was like, have you ever gone hiking in the Cascades or the Olympics? Like, I love the Cascades and the Olympics, and the hiking's amazing. And so I was telling a bioregional answer because hiking there is really different from where I grew up in the Ozarks. Whereas if I say, where do I like to go swimming? It's like, well, I like going swimming in the rivers of the Ozarks in Missouri. More than I didn't go swimming very much when I lived in Seattle. And so there's something about inviting people to feel their love of place as a good starting point. But from there, we have much more to say on that. That'll be an exploration throughout the next 6 months and beyond. So to be continued. And then Ralph, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I just wanted to catch up on some of the things that you said about how to fund the pool. And you've also mentioned the bioregional conferences that we're organizing as R3.0 in concert with our conference on September 9 and 10. And you also spoke about the funding needs of those people organizing things in their bioregions. And apart from the membership fees that you have that you can share around and donations that you get from individuals, there's of course also the chance that some of the organizations here use their own funding to a certain degree to support activities. So I just want to make known to everybody that we at R3.0 are dedicating 21,000 euros of our funding to those that are organizing confluences that go alongside with the conference. We have about 15 of those conferences already registered. There's a Google form where people can register their conferences, and they can apply for some of that funding. And we have divided that funding pool into three pieces. One for what we call so-called living room conferences or gatherings, and then those who are already organized and have venues, and others who are organized but need a bigger venue. So we know exactly that some of that will involve cost, and we're happy to do a fair share split amongst all of those conferences that are registering. So I think this is a third source of funding that we can actually add to your list, Joe. It's not just only the membership fees and donations, it is also funding from members of the design school like R3.0, giving away part of their funding to activities that align in a win-win situation, both with the design school, but also with R3.0, and even a win-win-win where the conference organizers can actually, have their events going alongside the conference, partially funded through our help. So I think it's worthwhile saying that and mention that as a third source. There's not only those two, I think there's the third one as well, and we will aim to continue to do so in the future as well.
Thank you, Ralph. This is super important. And basically, you could think of it as joint funding endeavors, if you wanted. Like R3.0 has a funding endeavor, and the design school has a funding endeavor, and we have a joint funding endeavor, which is we want the same things to happen, just in different community contexts, but we're overlapping. And because we're in a partnership between R3.0 and the design school, it's very easy for us to say, well, one thing might happen is like this fundraising that we do in this funding pool might be really successful, where we're able to bring even more funding to what R3.0 is doing. And at the same time, we can name that there is a source of funding coming into this pool, which is the pool includes that 21,000 euros that R3.0 has. And then the questions become about allocation priorities, which is something we're just starting to explore and formalize. And then also in the chat, I dropped a link to Kinship Earth, which is another group that I'm helping to promote and fundraise for, to tell the story of Bioregional Flow Fund starter kits, which is to basically help people with the legal structuring of setting up a flow fund and best practices for creating a flow fund, as well as providing seed funding to do flow funding. And so Kinship Earth is another example where they received $500,000 last year. They've already allocated about 240,000 of that to flow funders, and they're building a bioregional flow fund infrastructure. And I know that there's some partnerships happening among members of this call about seeking more funding for that to happen through Kinship Earth. So that's another example of this, similar to what you're saying.
Joe, before we move on, I just wanted to say that Bill has posted a couple of links in the chat, and I also want to mention that it's not just R3.0 bringing the conferences, also bringing our advocacy partner network into the mix. And I want to specifically acknowledge the work of Anna and Neil Davidson, who have worked together with us on a Confluence guidance document, which we will share broadly so that people can get more inspiration, not just how to do a conference organized around our conference, but also as a general guidance document on how you can immerse yourself into the idea of confluences and how to organize those for whatever purpose you want to do something like that as well. So thanks, Anna and Neil, who are both on the call here as well. And this document will go out early next week. And it's a gift to all, not just those that follow the R3.0 conference confluences.
I'll just add that I'm very excited that Anne and Neil are finding more support in what they're doing, and that I want to see even more of that occur. So yes, please, and thank you. And now over to you, Dan. Oh, you're still muted.
Thanks. Hi, Joe, and everybody. I'm really excited. I just learned about your work now with the design school from our local Sonoma Marin, where I live in Sonoma County. And I've been heading up a compost coalition here that from a previous composter locally, and I've also headed up the State Compost Association, which I've just moved away from and handed that up to the next generation. But I'm still working with Bioresources Alliance here in California, which is a statewide alliance, and we're now trying to get it linked into UC Davis. I've been involved in circular economy stuff for a long time, and I agree wholeheartedly with your perspective on using water as the central feature of bioregions, because obviously the bioregions are totally dependent on that, and all life is dependent on it. But one of the things I've found, and I think I first met you when we were taking the pro-social course, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And, you know, Elaine Ostrom's work and her stuff on polycentric governance, because I have to work with all different kinds of organizations, whether they're universities, government agencies, private companies, and the government agencies who own property, mainly counties, states, and federal government. So getting all those to work together, I mean, we have a strong land trust movement here in North Bay as well, because we're agricultural, but also bioresources management between the composters, whether they're on farm, you know, part of the wine industry and so forth. So I was just wondering if, you know, because, you know, property ownership and real estate is kind of the foundation, and how we cooperate and collaborate with these different ownership forms, whether they're public-private partnerships. That's one of the things I've been working on for a number of years in order to instantiate circular economics in our state, which is basically a build on the recycling economy. I'm just loving the bioregional approach that you're taking in this design school. So I'm just wondering if you have any specifics about how to leverage various forms of property ownership.
Oh, I have way too many thoughts on that. I'll just acknowledge that when I was studying the root causes of mass poverty and inequality, that mass poverty was invented in the 1600s in England with the enclosure movement, with the privatizing of common space land, which
That's
gives you a hint of how important land is in all of this.
Right.
That basically the undoing of that capitalist extractive, you know, various words we could use for it, system, is actually to return land to the commons. And that my partner Penny and I we have an organization we're setting up here in Colombia called Tierra Sagrada, creating social agreements around how to bring land into the commons. And one of the really powerful things is to take a multi-capital approach, which is basically to recognize there are different kinds of value, that it can be stored, moved, and transformed in diverse ways. And then to just, like in cybernetics, to just start closing loops and just get loops folding back on themselves. And so what I see is really critical with what we're talking about today is the loop that we close is a social system loop.
Mhm.
Is there's financial support to a group of people in a landscape who are organizing in their own landscape, but they're connected back to a network of places through the online community. And what we want to do is create the supports that bring flow to them, flow into their communities. Their community supports the continual learning back to the larger network of places. And that doesn't mean money flows back in. It just means that flow comes back in. And one of the elements of this I think is most important over the long term is very practical models that have been implemented. Like when I think of land trusts as an example, I know that on Whidbey Island in Cascadia, there's an amazing land trust network. And in the Aspen Valley in Carbondale, Colorado, there's an amazing land trust network. On the Oak Ridges Moraine in Southern Ontario, there's an amazing land trust network, and so on, right? Just to say they're out there. And here in Colombia, they don't have land trusts. So we're inventing it. Like they don't have that language, they don't have that concept. And so to just among my Colombian friends, helping them learn about these other networks, the learning exchange between the places and the actually experiencing the models. Because one level up from supporting place-based organizing is supporting basically transportation logistics. Like, let's say part of a gathering you're doing in Sonoma is to invite someone from my bioregion to fly there and visit you, and you paid for an airline ticket for them. so that we're actually supporting the exchanges between bioregions. I think that this kind of thing it brings everything up a level, and where there's just more synergies. There are more edges, and so therefore there are more synergies. But I would say it's something like that elevating, basically making clear, like, what is it that you're doing there in the wine? Like, what are you doing in Napa Valley? What are you doing in that area that someone could learn from up in, in the Colorado Basin, in Cascadia, in somewhere else? In France, they have wine country, or wherever it may be, where you have this idea of sister bioregions, which is you share something in common that is either because it's the same or it's different, but it's a shared theme that allows you to have meaningful exchanges, that this activation pool can actually support that as well. And so big topic. I'm looking forward to talking about it more.
No, it's great. It's great. That's really, really, really helpful, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm totally aligned with you. It's deeply important. And then Claire, over to you.
Yeah, well, when Rolf was talking about Rolf and Bill about the actually having funding pools in the conference, it made me realize, oh, I've got to talk about the Cascadia BioFi conference, because that's coming up in May, and it's built on there was a refi conference that used to happen in Seattle, and they asked us to come and actually take it over and build it out. And so what it is, it's really meant to be able to bring together the regenerative practitioners, the various people that are involved, that are at the edge of finance and questioning it, so foundations and refi people. And so to have a conversation, but we were really keen on it being not just a whole lot of presentations. We wanted it to be experiential and for people to actually have an opportunity to practice some of the things that we were talking about. So we'll be using some of our flow funds to seed that process. And so that by the time the conference wraps up, people will already be connected to local on the ground projects, not so much because they will have come from all over, but to actually see what that process is like. And there will be practical next steps that they can either be involved in directly or follow because they've had that connection. So quite excited. So I've put the link to the conference website in the chat, and it's May 16th to 18th, and there'll probably be an online portion to that the week before. So
yeah, thank you, Claire. And for those who haven't seen it, I just dropped into the chat another article published today explaining what a design immersion is for bioregional regeneration and giving a detailed case study, if you will, a day-by-day example of what happened in Barichara, with the idea that, like Claire was in Barichara with us, so I'm sure some of that thinking is shaping what they're doing for Cascadia's BioFi event. So this way of cross-pollinating our ideas through our different experiences. And I definitely encourage everyone who's in Cascadia or near enough to travel to attend their gathering, because it's going to be quite powerful. And so thank you for that, Claire. And then Marie, over to you.
Sorry, I just unmuted myself. I was just constantly reflecting upon my experience of other organizations that I've worked with, particularly the Institute of Ecotechnics created by SO2 and the Center for Human Ecology in the UK, and how much difficulties they've had with financing the projects over the years and the models that they chose to use. Now, the Institute chose a model of enterprise, limited companies, and each project becoming self-sufficient as quickly as possible. However, the seed money was provided by one billionaire, and when he pulled out of the Biosphere 2, well, he took with him a whole slice of projects that had to close down. Since then, they have struggled because, for one thing, there's a generational thing. These are all people who started all of this work in 1970s, just after Ashbury and all that. And so they're all in their 70s to 90s, and they don't have the same level of energy. And there's not like a next generation that has like stepped in. Now, reasons for that, I don't know. There are many reasons for that. But anyway, to cut a long story short, the CHE, the Center for Human Ecology, has the same problem. It was also started in the 70s by Waddington in Edinburgh, and they have struggled with two things: interscene warfare within the own organization, which IE has suffered from as well, but also always this kind of poverty mindset. That means that they can't find funding because human ecology is constantly questioning the status quo, and therefore the Center for Human Ecology was pushed literally from Edinburgh University to the Open University to Glasgow University, and they finally had to create their own university because the system moves in to shut them down. The question then in my mind is two things relating directly to regeneration funding. Can organizations join, or is it just only individuals? Second question, if organizations can join, can companies join and make some sort of a percentage sharing thing? So everything the company makes, a percentage goes back to the school. There's just two ideas that came to me. That would help these organizations. I've already started making the connection. I'm going to continue. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, these are really good questions. And I think that we can look at things like R3.0's partnership network and others, that within our group here, we have different people with a lot of experience on these things. And what I would say initially is that in my experience, working with organizations is pretty much guaranteed to fail at achieving transformation. But working with individual human beings who are affiliated with organizations is a different thing. So like, I don't work with R3.0 because it's R3.0. I work with Bill and I work with Ralph, who happen to be R3.0. Now, there are other people in the R3.0 team, but you know what I mean? It's like, I work with them as human beings. And then they leverage their organizational affiliations and networks appropriate to what they're doing. Similarly, I work with Roberta Hill, but not with the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy, and so forth. And the reason for that is that I find this work to be both more agile when you don't need to go through a bureaucratic process of an organization to figure out how it would position itself for funding. Like, how it's just like policy making, right? Like you end up with people adding their earmarked needs and other things that aren't really what you were doing it for, and whatever. Like, things happen that water it down or that make it clumsy and cumbersome. Whereas like two human beings aligned around doing something can take an action really quickly. As Susan Bozak in the GTB has said, the best way to get something done is to bring a feisty youth together with a fiery grandmother. To this intergeneration. It's so funny and it's so true, right? You can just see it, right? Like this, one of those like really like fired up old ladies in the community, and a young person's energy is like, just get out of the way because you're not going to stop them. You're just not going to stop them. But it's not. You didn't go to the feisty you didn't go to the feisty granny nonprofit. You went to the feisty granny. You went to the person, and I think there's something really important about that. Similarly, when I've worked with social impact companies, it was never the company, it was the person. I made a connection with the same sustainability director. They managed to get their carbon offsets money sent to our regenerative school in Barichara instead of some other carbon market scheme that they did. But it wasn't the company that did it, it was the person. Now, the person had some authority within the company to be able to do that, but it was still the person. And so I would say that the exploration of the organizational relationships is still an exploration of human relationships, but with those human relationships very attuned to their knowledge of those contexts. There are people who know how to work with organizations in various ways. Please bring that. Hell yes. Let's explore that in lots of ways. But to bring an organization's agenda into what is a grassroots human movement, there are these two parts. One, it just works better among humans. And the other is it's a decolonizing step to take the corporate person out of the game and focus just directly with human persons. And so a human person can leverage a corporate person as a tool, but rather than treating the corporate person as the person, it's one of those subtle shifts in semantics, but it's a really big one. Way more to say on that. Because as you can see, once we get into strategies and funding at a larger scale, we can talk about all kinds of things. But I just found in practice, the human to human connection is sort of like where it's at anyway. It's like, it's what works. And yeah, Sanjay, over to you. And nice to see you.
Hey, nice to see you. Real quick, um, based on the deliberations so far, pretty interesting how various frameworks are coming together, talking about circular economy, circularity, because I'm on the state of Colorado board for circularity, sort of pivoting away from extractive economy. But an interesting thing tied to what the prior person asked the question about organizations. I know there's, and also tying to land trust that was mentioned. Interestingly, there are new forms of forming organizations, right? Steward-based ownership, perpetual purpose trust, which might be an interesting way to bring those kind of organizations into the ecosystem of bioregionalism. So I just wanted to hear if you had any perspectives on that, or anybody else who might know more about that.
I would say that at the level of the bioregional organizers and the bioregion itself, that there will be a lot of what you're talking about, of working with new or just innovative organizational forms. It'll be all over the place. Where it becomes more of a problem, I think, is to move away from the context of the bioregion. And then you're just back in a globalist perspective again. By accident, you'll just slip into it because of all the tendencies of that space. So like for you to do that, say, within the greater Denver area or the Front Range or wherever it is, within an extractive region of mining over in Western Colorado or over in the Ogallala in the East, whatever it is, it makes a great deal of sense to explore those models within your context because you can design those organizations to fit their context.
Yeah.
But once you transcend the context, then the design becomes less anchored to reality. And I think that's where the risk comes in. So I would say, hell yes to what you're talking about, but direct it as much as you can back toward its own sort of local economic infrastructure, cultural context. Because there you're going to have the ability to evolve and adapt those models through your organizational learning to those changing contexts, which give you helpful constraint. As you know, as a designer, the helpful constraint is they're serving that context. What does that context need as it changes? Rather than trying to serve something like global speculative markets on the stock exchange or some other context that is not well suited to sustainability or regeneration. That's a good enough as like a wedge into a conversation that's a lot bigger. But it's just one of those things that is a way of bioregional organizing, is designing adaptive fitness of organizational form to bioregional context. That's one way of doing bioregional organizing. We can explore this more through the learning journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, there's plenty of room to explore that. And Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. And your last sentence there about adapting to the context is so critical. And picking up on Dan's point earlier, which also mentioned land trusts, but how do we work with property ownership and existing organisations, and several of the other issues that have come up in the chat around the organisational power over versus the bottom-up power with, and the self-organisational capacities that we're trying to build through bioregional immersions, congresses, confluences, all of these things. A lot of this is around the self-organisational fractal element of a transformed human. And the human element is the human engagement element. From an Indigenous perspective, do you actually know what you're talking about? Are you connected to place? How do you fit in? The fractal element of that builds into organisations. So as we go forward, we're going to have to work out how do we bring together those fractal elements to create organisations. And we're also going to have to work with the existing fractal elements, who might be the transformed individuals still sitting inside organisations with huge power over everything we want to do. And what we're trying to work on, and this is the depth element of the confluencing process that goes beyond the size element of that, is how do we hold space long enough, and not necessarily comfortable space, sometimes uncomfortable space long enough for new patterns to form. Because if new patterns don't form, we don't have self-organization. And so that's the dance we're playing and the tension we're feeling between the reporting back versus the how do we hold the deeper story that's still emerging? And I just wanted to tie that up with the element here of the narrative. Anybody can tell a story. Whether that story deeply resonates with the people who were actually present is another question. And whether it's actually damaging or beneficial is another question. And so we have to, I think, step back a little bit and say, as individuals, we must pay attention to our attention, which is self-awareness and how are we connected. As teams, we must begin to have the conversations about our conversations, which is this sort of thing in the dialogue. As enterprises or as organizations, we must begin to organize our organizing, networks of networks. And as ecosystems, we must begin to coordinate our coordinating, which is our systems of awareness-based collective action. And all of these things are coming together in real time. We've got the grassroots and the new shoots bubbling up. We've got the finance coming down, but we've still got this organizational power overlayer, and we're all living in the two worlds between Horizon 1 and Horizon 3 and somewhere in the middle, and it's bloody messy, but some of us have been walking this journey for a while, and how do we bring our skills to help to get the vertical alignment, not just the horizontal alignment? And that's what I think is really powerful about this next learning journey, and we're looking to see how can we contribute to that in the context of a bridge of boats of multiple events leading towards ultimately collapse aware or collapse accepting confluences and players that are working together to build the bioregional capacity we need going into collapse.
Neil, you prompted me to want to just show this graphic again and comment on it, and with respect to what you were saying, which is with this graphic that I showed. This is at Origen del Agua. And there are two things I want to notice about this that are related to what you said, because the depth comes about because of these two things. Part of the depth that comes about is by actually being based in reality. This is a real physical place. Like, here's a photograph of a real physical place. And so the place-based dynamic of catalyzing and supporting place-based organizing enables the place-based relationships to explore deeper capacities in themselves. And that's one thing that will be a thread throughout the learning journey and beyond. The other thing is that you just look at this landscape, anyone who knows ecology, that is a degraded landscape. This picture is a post-collapse context. This is a context where the forest was cut down decades ago. The erosion already occurred. There's no topsoil left. This is a post-collapse scenario, which is to say we are doing regeneration in a degraded landscape. And that really, I think, strongly supports what you're saying about how we need to be recognizing the role of collapse in this, to be collapse aware, collapse accepting, and in some cases, sort of post-collapse regenerating, because in some ways we're like, oh, well, that forest was already destroyed. There was an ecological collapse that occurred there 50 years ago. And so, and that is actually a design element. It's a feature of the design. And I just wanted to name that because it's so significant and it's so easy to overlook. That picture that I showed you was a flourishing tropical dry forest 50 years ago. And now it's so destroyed. If you dropped water on it, before I stacked those rocks, if you dropped water on it, the water would just carve the clay that was the layer below the soil because the soil had been washed away decades ago. And so that's a post-collapse scenario. The amazing thing about that picture, for those of you who were with us at Origen del Agua a couple of weeks ago, is that the forest is coming back fast. It's been 4 years we've been regenerating it, and it's already transformed. Just to say, by knowing how to do this, we can actually go to that depth of design. So just to say, hell yes to everything you're saying.
Thanks. One final little quick connection back to Dan's work, because you mentioned his work with composting. We have to be very aware that we're in the process of composting the existing colonial structures. We are also composting the existing organisation. We are composting all the current budgeting models in every local government globally, right? So we are looking at the redirection of all financing towards survival, right? Not business. And that's actually the composting that has to happen now. And the consciousness of that composting is to be working with those that are aware of how close we are to social, economic, ecological systems collapse, not just the collapse of the soil structure from a fire or whatever. And that composting metaphor is so powerful in this. And we've got to get now the soil activated to regrow. So thanks, mate.
Yeah, and this funding pool is very overtly decolonizing. we decolonize money by giving it to each other. We just like support each other directly. I mean, that's like what democracy is supposed to do, and which clearly it doesn't. But that this is part of that grassroots empowerment, and that is profoundly decolonial. So I just wanted to accent that point. And then over to you, Claire.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to respond. I mean, Neil and I have had really great conversations before about this thing, and that image that you just brought up. We sometimes talk about this as erosion control, but essentially there are how do we, when we do these the funding flows, how do you prevent what is starting to build from just getting washed away? And yeah, building that very core infrastructure of the people who typically don't get paid or don't get supported, but are actually doing the work, are often the people that are, often it's a woman, often it's somebody who is very, when you want something done, you can go and ask them and they know the stuff that's going on and can actually help to connect you, and there's trust there. But that hasn't, there aren't structures to support that. And so we've been really interested in Cascadia in like investing in what does that mean, and also creating a shared context through the bioregional mapping process so that there is a container to make decisions from. So we're seeing that as really, really powerful. And I just want to bring in one other piece is as we've been naming that, we've been finding that we're working with other groups that are doing just phenomenal work. And one of the things that one of the groups is centering, Salmon Nation Collabs, is they're working on repatriation and Indigenous economic development. And they're saying, trauma and trauma around money is such a huge deal, and that can actually undermine absolutely everything. So if they're not actually dealing with, like, if kindness isn't like something that's really cherished and valued and actually supported, and looking at like what are the trauma patterns, so there's sort of like a constellation or counseling yeah, looking at like what are those patterns on a regular basis, and then some kind of coaching, some kind of way of looking and actually moving the dial so that you're paying attention and you're moving beyond where that is. I just wanted to bring that in because as we've been doing this work, that's the sort of stuff that's been sort of kind of coalescing, and it feels really important. It's all part of the building the soil that's required for the work we're doing. So.
Yeah, obviously I resonate very strongly with what you're saying from my own experience. And that one of the key things that needs to happen is that something needs to happen. Sometimes I say these almost stupid statements like that. What needs to happen is something needs to happen. And I'm making a joke on purpose. The idea of providing small amounts of money to enable something to happen, to enable some kind of an organizing, some kind of a gathering, some kind of a conversation, to enable something to happen, brings out a lot of that reality that you could like sit, under a tree or with a book or at your computer and imagine all kinds of things the way things are going to go. But once you're around real humans with all of their wounds, with all the things that are happening, that's what you actually have to work with. So this ideation, this place of like being stuck in your head, if you don't get to actually practicing, actually going out and doing something in the community, you'll never know that that's what you needed to do. So what you're describing is like people will discover very quickly what you're saying if they practice. And so part of the impetus of this funding model is to get people over that little activation threshold for them to want to try organizing. Like if someone says, oh, well, if the design school would give me $1,000 to help organize an event, I'm more likely to organize an event than we actually have more people practicing. And just naming the significance of that part. So yes. And then Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Joe, and it's great to participate here. As I'm listening to everybody contribute to the conversation and your description of it, it sounds like there are a lot of learnings about maybe what not to do. And as I hear Neil and Claire about composting funding models and So my background, just to bring in a little bit of context, is working with a lot of investors, mainly in private equity, and even some very well-intentioned and some that actually, have the track record or have some form of accounting for what the positive impact has been. I'm curious. I would love to read more on the sort of things that were just being shared about what to watch out for, what not to do, what to avoid, so not to name names, not to bring any negative connotation to anybody really, as we all learn. But just, I'll be curious to learn more if you have resources, if there's other things where I could learn about what not to do, because I hear some ideas sometimes, but you have to have the capitalist element to make it sustainable. And I hear similar arguments being made in different circles. So I'm really trying to stay focused on being, sustainable, regenerative, and would love to not fall in similar pitfalls.
Yeah.
So it's mainly around funding, but yeah, so
Well, like
would love to learn.
one of the phrases we use a lot here in the design school is that you move at the speed of trust. And this is one of those ideas that is actually a beautifully rich concept. What does it mean to move at the speed of trust? Because a lot of what is done wrong or what we shouldn't do would violate that. Like, oh, you're actually not moving at the speed of trust. If you'll see that you'll end up with a lot of different heuristics about what that means. For example, in that graphic I showed that Elias mentioned in the chat, that you really liked, I like it too, Elias, of, we stacked some rocks and we started building soil. But if I showed you like how big was that stack of rocks, was like a meter wide, like 3 feet wide. If I made that stack of rocks too big on a slope with that much clay, once it gets really wet, it would ooze and not have structural stability. So I had to make a bunch of small rock dams. And so there's something about, which, I could build one of those rock dams with like, what, 20 rocks? I'd build one of those rock dams in literally like 2 minutes. I'd just walk around, pick up rocks, stack them, and walk and do another one. It was very meditative. But one of the lessons was the way to do something big is to do something small a bunch of times, but in a smart way. And the way to do something big is to do something over a long time with a lot of people, which means you take the time to build trust. And the way to know that what you're doing is working is to recognize you're part of the system and just dispel any habits of thought that, like, one of my friends, Simon, who was with us in the Barichara immersion, he's a philosopher and he really likes to play with words. And he was like, we should stop calling them investors as if they're outside what they're investing in. And I was like, that's clever, because you're not investing in something as if you're not part of it. You're part of it. And that's one of the things about being bioregional that's such a big deal, is if we can get people to invest in their own place, they'll recognize they're part of the system. There are all these feedbacks that'll give them that. And so I think you can start to see hints of many things we could say about what not to do. But yeah, we have a lot of resources on this, but also we'll be talking about it a lot just in general as we go. But is there something else is there something you want to say in response to
that? I don't think I have the experience but I have heard just wonderful results from things like ACT, Amazon Conservation Team, and other groups that have successfully created some funding or economic mechanisms for very local indigenous communities. So I'm just trying to track what is the through line of doing things right. And I appreciate that. Don't really have any immediate responses. I'm just loving being part of this.
Well, we're really glad that you're here. And one of the things I've learned by working with different kinds of donors, and for me is like, real impact investors recognize that they don't try to get a financial return in a dying world. But they'll invest in social outcomes, they'll invest in ecological outcomes, they'll invest in knowledge outcomes, and so on. They'll invest in infrastructure and commons-based land and all kinds of things. And what I found is that the ability of the person who's bringing the money to recognize that bringing the money is part of their own spiritual process and part of their own healing process, that these two things are essential, that we're all healing, we're all wounded healers walking each other home. Um, and um, and that part of that is that the people bringing the money are part of the healing process, and that they're actually going to be getting healing in some way or another by participating. And so the hands-off way of bringing money of, well, I gave money, now I don't have to think about it. Like, well, no, that's not the point. The point is to come back into relationships and then discover our accountability to those relationships. I'm just like, I have a relationship to my child after I've chosen to have a child. And my accountability is by being in relationship, but that's true for everything else as well. I think this might be a good time to summarize what we talked about today, and then we can bring the session to a close. This has been a really beautiful, rich conversation. And one thing I love about the kind of people that gather in these sessions is how much we talk around the topic of the presentation, because we're all such systemic thinkers and doers that we're all just bringing other parts of the system in. I love that. I love that. And at the same time, there's this thread through the conversation in the last hour and a half, which is we already created this funding pool. We're already putting it to use, but now we're just making it known that it exists. And so as we enter into the learning journey that starts next Tuesday, some of you will want to do an immersion and will be able to request funding. Some of you may put money into this pool. Some of you might go back and go, oh, I should invite friends to join the learning journey because I didn't know they were doing this too. I just thought it was an online course. You know, we're a community of practice. And so we're creating structures to practice together. And finance is an important part of that. And the other thing that I want to say is that because so many of us are already practicing regenerative finance, like the way Ralph said that R3.0 already has a funding pool for confluences, and that Claire said they're doing a Cascadia BioFi Summit because they're doing bioregional finance work. And, you know, there are others here saying similar things, that we're already doing stuff. But how do we make that visible to each other? And then how do we pool those little activation seeds, those little bits of seed funding for those who are just dipping their toes into this? And that this is going to make a big difference for them to have learning support, social and emotional support, and financial support to practice. And as I look out into the larger world and see how my social media feed is full of topics I never talk about. I never talk about Trump or Elon Musk, etc., but the algorithms fill my feeds with that. They don't care that I don't talk about it. They're pushing it in my face. Well, what do I want in front of me is I want the kinds of conversations we're having. And so if we can tell stories to each other, we'll actually create these feedback loops among each other. And the mobilizing of financial resources, it's part of that. It's just not separate from it. And so the idea of the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool is to make visible that there's a mechanism that someone can receive financial support for their bioregional organizing. Initially, we're doing it connected with the learning journey because we have 6 months of scaffolding and we have lots of bioregional groups. It's not that we want to limit it to that, it's just what a great place to prototype it. And then also that people can contribute into the funding pool. As they see what it's doing, I think people will want to. And that the two ways I mentioned, plus the third Ralph mentioned, are bringing more members into the school, donating into the pool, and matching or bringing other pools together into an alliance of pools. Because notice Ralph didn't say that he had to put that 21,000 euros into the design school's budget. No, they can be a parallel pool, but by being in relationship, we can deploy a larger collective pool, which is sort of like having 2 rainwater harvesting tanks instead of 1, but they're both in the same forest. And so you see that already shows us 3 really powerful and concrete ways. And I think we'll find more as we go. Then I see that Neil has something he wants to share, and then we'll come to a close. So Neil, over to you.
I have a short poem that I think fits with what you've been saying, Joe, and if it's of value to the group, perhaps I can bring it. It was actually written in honor of the Faith Ecology Network event and a bunch of craftivists in Australia who each were crocheting their own pieces of what became a river. And the picture on my poem is actually about 30 or 40 meters long of bringing these pieces together, and they carry that around with them. And it's so beautiful. And the poem is called Crochet. So if it please the group, soulful fractals from the mind stream in flows of liquid love, threaded dreams that wrap combined head and heart like hand in glove. Holes imagined, spaces filled, artisanal composition, tensioned, loose, and sometimes frilled, threaded hues positioned. Touch and feel are finely tuned, heart and soul aligned, legs and hips warmly cocooned, as love fills hearts assigned. I thought you'd like it. It's inspired by the River Yarners, who were a community craftivist group drawing public attention to the plight of the Wombool, which is in English the Macquarie River in Bathurst, New South Wales, that was then under threat from the sale of treated effluent that normally goes back into the river to a gold mine for commercial profit at social and environmental expense. So the healing work that needs to happen and the weaving work that is already happening, and the fact that we've each got a piece of that puzzle and a thread to weave together. And hats off to you guys. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, Neil, for bringing the mystical, the intuitive, and the esoteric through beautiful poetry. So much appreciated. And so I want to thank everyone for a wonderful conversation today. Like I said, this recording I'm going to upload today, and then I'm going to make it publicly available. So if you want to share this recording with anyone, please do. And invite them to come and play with us, because we're, as one of my friends once said, this is the only game in town. Not the design school. No, this work is the only game in town. Regenerating the earth through bioregional organizing and creating alternative pathways into regenerative economies and spiritual atonement of coming back into wholeness. This is the only game in town. And so the more we can be together in it, the more that we can discover the support we needed was right next to us. We just had to know how to ask, and that it will come through our relationships. And so with that, thank you everyone very much. To be continued. And we'll see you all next Tuesday for the learning journey, if not before.